Hello and welcome back to the mini course on the economic impact of climate change. This is episode 7, and in this video we are going to discuss the impact on construction and manufacturing sectors. Let us get started. So far we have set the context on why this course is important from the exam perspective. We have discussed the very basics: what is greenhouse effect, what is global warming, and what is climate change. We have seen how climate change is impacting the world and India. We have set a framework to analyze the economic impact on specific sectors, and then we have understood the economic impact on agriculture. Framework that I was talking about, this is a three-part framework where first we understand why is the sector of importance to the economy. Then we see in what ways the sector is going to be impacted by climate change, and finally we review what are the key policy actions being implemented to help the sector adapt or mitigate the impact, right? And we said we will talk about 4 sectors. We have already discussed the impact on agriculture, and in this video we are going to talk about construction and manufacturing together, because these 2 sectors have a lot of overlap in terms of how they are going to be impacted and what policy steps are being implemented or planned, right? So let us first understand why or in what way the construction sector is important to the economy. So first of all, what do we mean when we say the construction sector? So this means 4 basic types of construction are included: commercial construction, residential construction, industrial construction, and any type of infrastructure construction, right? Now this sector is the second largest source of employment. It employs more than 5 crore people in the country, right? After agriculture, it is the second largest source of employment generation for the economy. It is contributing around 9% of the country's gross domestic product or GDP, and it was the second largest recipient of foreign direct investment in the year 2020-21. So from all these economic aspects, it is quite an important sector for the economy overall, right? And we have been growing, this sector has been growing well, and India is projected that it will become the third largest construction market in the world by 2025. And then related to this is that the government in recent times has increased its capex. Capex means capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is expenditure that is going towards creation of any long-term asset, right? Things like roads, bridges, ports, so on, right? So government has sharply increased its capital expenditure in recent years, and this is expected that it will help in increasing the growth rate not only of the construction sector but also its contribution to the overall GDP. So if you look at this chart from the budget documents of 2023-24, then you get an idea of what I'm talking about when I say that the government has sharply increased its expenditure, right? So in FY 2016, which means the year 2015-16, the government's capital expenditure was 2.5 lakh crore rupees. In the most recent budget for 2023-24, which is FY 24, the government has said it is going to spend 10 lakh crore rupees. So in a period of 8 years, the government's expenditure on creating capital assets has gone up by 4 times, right? And capital assets, like we discussed, mostly are of the type go in infrastructure creation or long-term assets. So in infrastructure, government will invest money in creating new highways, creating new ports, creating new bridges, dams, etc., right? So a lot of money is going to be invested in this infrastructure sector and consequently in construction, and therefore we say that the share of the sector in GDP and its growth rate is also expected to then increase more, right? So it's already a very important sector to the economy, and with increasing focus of the government on this sector, we expect that it is going to be even more important in the years to come. Now the other sector, why is manufacturing important to the economy? Now it contributes around 17% of the GDP currently, and it employs around 2 crore 80 lakh workers right now, right? And the government's focus has again been on increasing the share of manufacturing in GDP to 25% by the year 2025. And for this, a number of initiatives have been launched in recent years, right? So first, to give you some examples, first was this Make in India initiative that was launched in the year 2014, and the focus is on 25 sectors, again, in which the government wants to incentivize or encourage manufacturing capacity creation in the country, right? Make in India, that you create capacity to manufacture different kinds of goods in the country itself. A more recent initiative is the production linked incentive scheme that was launched in 2020, right? The government is spending around 2 lakh crore in this to give incentives to various kinds of industries such as mobile phone manufacturing, semiconductors, automobiles, drones, to set up additional manufacturing capacity in the country. And the hope is that in the long run, this not only satisfies global demand for these items, but also sets up India as a major hub of export of these items, right? And then in consequently, what will happen? It will create economic activity, so it will generate more share of the GDP and hopefully reach this target date. It will a target of 25%. It will also create a lot of jobs. So the government is hoping it will create around 1 crore new jobs in the sector, right? So in this way, again, the importance of manufacturing in the economy will increase further. Similarly, this is for the textile industry, the PM Mitra, the PM Mega Integrated Textile Regions and Apparel. So basically, these are planned to be large what do you call industrial parks, where all the facilities for textile manufacturer, right from processing of what you call the yarn into fabric and then apparel, all the steps involved. So for facilities for all of them will be available at single location, and the hope is that again it will encourage a lot of investment in this sector, which also has the potential to create large number of jobs, right? So why is the government focusing on the manufacturing sector? So basically what happens, if you look at the economic history of the world, countries move from a stage of reliance on primary sector, right? Primary means reliance on things like agriculture, mining, etc., to the secondary sector, where you basically rely more on manufacturing to generate most of your GDP, and then finally to the tertiary or services sector, right? So this move from primary to secondary is very important in terms of creating a large number of good quality jobs. Jobs in the primary sector are involve very high degree of labor and generally pay less. So what happens as societies evolve is that as manufacturing base is created, then a large number of your workforce or a large part of your workforce moves from the primary to the secondary sector, and their incomes increase. So overall as a society, you become more prosperous. So far in our country, this has not happened to the extent desired. Even after the economic reforms of 1991 and the subsequent years, manufacturing share of GDP has sort of remained around the same level, right? So now through these several focused initiatives, the hope or the objective is to encourage manufacturing to grow faster than GDP, so that its share in GDP increases, and then a large number of jobs from the primary sector can be moved to the secondary sector. We already saw in the discussion on agriculture how almost 43% of the workforce is employed in agriculture. In that, what happens, like I said, is their incomes are very low, right? We saw that 85% of the farmers are small and marginal, so they have very small income. So if we are able to create this capacity, then a large section of that workforce can move to the manufacturing sector and hopefully have better lives, right? So that is the entire idea. So that is why the manufacturing sector is again important to the economy even right now, and with increasing focus of the government on incentivizing manufacturing in the country, we expect the importance to grow even further in the coming years. Right now, we will talk about the impact of climate change on construction and manufacturing. But before that, it is also important to understand that as uh, like factors that cause climate change, these two sectors have a significant contribution. So they have a significant causative impact, meaning they are significant sources of emissions which have led to climate change, right? So basically, what has happened is that in 2021, the construction sector emissions of carbon dioxide were at the highest level ever. So at a global level, the bodies that track, basically they said during the COVID lockdown years, the emissions had dropped sharply, and there was some hope that maybe this trajectory in some way could be maintained and we will see a period of now emissions going down. But after the economy reopened, what has happened is that emissions have increased at a very rapid rate, and in 2021 emissions were at the highest level ever, right? And basically, if we add the emissions created when these building materials such as concrete, steel, aluminum, glass, etc. are manufactured, then building represented around 37% of the total emissions of the world in 2021. And right, the more worrying thing is that expert bodies have said that if we look at continue with this trajectory for manufacturing and construction, then it will be very difficult to achieve the targets under the Paris Agreement, and they are not able to reduce their emissions to the extent required. Actually, emissions have increased, right? So this 37% that we say. So this is an extract from this global status report for buildings and constructions by the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions, which is a body sponsored or supported by the United Nations Environment Program. So we said that 37% of the emissions are coming from the construction sector, right? So in that, 6% emissions are directly coming from residential buildings. Various kind of indirect contributions are there, how buildings are being constructed. So the transportation, logistics involved in those things are also contributing to the emissions. And then similarly for non-residential, this distinction is there. And then we said in the manufacture of these construction materials, the emissions are created. And for concrete, aluminum and steel. And then for brick and glass, there is 3%. So this is an estimate because estimating the emissions from brick is very difficult. So, but this is largely an estimate that 37% of global carbon dioxide emissions are coming from manufacturing and construction and the manufacturing processes related to construction, right? So, and the more worrying thing is this, right, that the emissions are not reducing at the rate that they are required. In the year 2021, emissions actually increased, right? So as emissions increase, again we'll see worsening global warming and therefore worsening impact of climate change. Now, what will be the impact of climate change? Let us now look at each sector in turn. So first, let us see how the construction sector will be impacted, right? Now, what will happen? First of all, the cost of construction will increase, right? Now, we have already discussed that because of climate change, we will see extreme weather events occurring at higher frequency, and what will happen due to it, that work will be disrupted, right? So there are more floods, there are more events of intense rainfall, there are more events such as forest fires and all, right? So if such events are there, then or heat waves, then you can't work, right? You can't continue work, so your work will be halted. Now if you're constructing a large building, for example, you have already planned, maybe I will complete this building in 1 year, but because you can't foresee what climate events will happen in that 1 year period, so maybe for 1 month your project is delayed, right? So then your costs increase, right? Even otherwise, if extreme weather events happen, then supplies of the various kinds of material will be disrupted. Somewhere some train can't come on time, so your supply of cement is disrupted, your supply of steel is disrupted, and so on, right? So overall the work will be disrupted and your cost will increase, right, because of delays, and also increase in the supplies of raw material, and overall increase in uncertainty, right? You will not be able to plan projects as well as possibly you are able to do now, right? And then because these weather elements will become more of an enemy, right? There will be intense rainfall, there will be intense heat. So all of these then are enemies of construction, right? So how you will guard against them? So maintenance expenditure will go up, right? Buildings will have to be maintained more frequently, roads have to be maintained more frequently, more what you call carpeting of the roads will have to be done maybe more frequently. The construction will degrade quicker, life will decrease, so you will have to spend more money on maintenance and also eventually replacing these assets, right? And insurance costs will increase, right? If there are assets that are insured against whatever forms of damage, then the insurance companies now have decided premiums based on certain probabilities, that okay, if you're insured against, let's say, fire damage, right? But now if you are located in an area close to forest fires and you see now forest fires becoming more frequent, then insurance companies in the worst case might refuse to insure your building against forest fires, or they might increase your premium significantly. So again, your costs of overall project construction and management and maintenance will increase substantially, right? So this is the first impact that you will see. Overall, this thing, construction, will become more expensive. And then existing buildings will face threats, right? Various kinds of threats. Again, it is sort of related to what we have discussed already, that we will see more intense weather events, right? We will see more cyclones, we'll see more floods, we'll see heavy rains. So again, this will damage existing construction, right? So basically that damage will threaten the buildings that you have constructed. Again, you have constructed a building, let's say you plan to have a plan that this useful life of this building is, let's say, 25 to 30 years, right? But you have assume that life based on certain assumptions about how it will be impacted by external elements. Now that those external elements are becoming more intense, right? Their attack on your building is becoming more intense. Then your useful life will become less, and therefore the existing construction, roads, bridges, like I said, will become like maybe will survive for less duration. And so again, eventually what it means is that these things will become more expensive, right? The next impact, and about this we have discussed in the previous videos as well. In the video on agriculture we talked about it, and in the video on the impact of what you call um, global warming on the country, Abhishek sir had talked about in quite detail on how the IPCC report talks about wet bulb temperatures increasing and impacting worker productivity. So this is going like this is a recurring theme and a recurring challenge that any industry that relies on heavy labor will face, right? So what happens generally is that with every 1 degree increase in temperature, the atmosphere's ability to hold moisture increases by around 7%. Right. So for tropical countries, what will happen is that as the temperature increases, the air will become more humid. And what happens is then it exposes our bodies to something called humid heat, right? So if there is a lot of humidity and there is a lot of heat, our body is not able to reduce its temperature through sweating because the atmosphere is not able to basically take up additional moisture. So what happens then is that whole operating environment becomes hazardous to human beings. So there is this study published in the scientific journal Nature called "Increased Labor Losses and Decreased Adaptation Potential in a Warmer World." It basically says that when wet bulb temperature reaches 35 degrees Celsius, then working outdoor is going to become very, very risky, and people might even face death in such scenarios if they expose themselves to such temperatures for a very long time, right? So this we have already discussed that when humid heat levels are high, then human bodies cannot cool down, right? So what will happen to workers in labor heavy sectors such as agriculture, construction, etc., is that workers will need frequent breaks, right? Because we will not be able to cool down, so we will be fatigued and we will need to like first work slowly. We will not be able to exert the full effort that we are able to do now. So first we'll need to work slowly, and then we'll need to take breaks frequently so that our body is able to maintain its ability to function, right? Then we will need to be hydrated regularly to continue to function in this scenario of high humid heat, right? And what will happen, and this we have discussed in the video on agriculture as well, that our country is going to or projected to face the highest loss in working hours globally, right? If there is a 2 degree Celsius warming of the world overall, then around 100 billion work hours are expected to be lost. And if it goes to 4 degrees, then it is going to be almost 2.5 times. 259 billion work hours are going to be lost. Now, if you put a money value to it, then it is around 240 billions in PPP terms. PPP basically stands for purchasing power parity. So it is not like in terms of what you call exchange rate. It's a way of converting one currency to another, considering the purchasing power of the currency and not the market based exchange rate, right? So in those terms, what will happen is if we lose 100 billion work hours under a 2 degree Celsius warming scenario, then our economy overall will lose almost $240 billion, right? So huge impact in terms of the hit to worker productivity, and then consequently these sectors which rely heavily on workers are going to be impacted, right? So we might see increasing mechanization in these sectors, right? And then that carries another challenge for a like country with large number of people such as India, that if we are talking about first agriculture already being pressured, right? 43% of the workforce, and we have seen how 80% of our population needed some form of government support during the economic crisis because of the pandemic. Now if industries move to greater mechanization and a lot of these physical jobs are replaced by machines, then where will these people who are displaced by this mechanization find livelihood from, right? So that's another challenge that we are going to face as a society and as an economy. Now coming to the manufacturing sector. what will happen is that there are studies showing that if the climate is warmer, the economic output is lower. And this is more so in developing countries, again, because developing countries are more reliant on human labor compared to machines, which can function in more extreme environments more easily, right? So there is a study by the University of Chicago. So this basically collected data from around 58,000 factories across India, and they found that revenue for these factories decreased by around 2% for every 1 degree rise in annual temperature, right? So 2% might not seem a big number, but overall in economy terms, if you think, it is a huge impact, right? Our economy generally grows at anywhere between 6 to 7% or 6 to 8% annually. Now, at a huge economy level, 58,000 is a small, not a small number, right? So if at such a large scale 2% of your income is being reduced, it's actually going to translate into a huge number, right? It's a big impact. So again, why is this? Again, it's because of the impact on labor productivity, right? In higher temperatures, the workers are not going to be able to function at the same level of efficiency, or even like there's, like we discussed, if at in extreme scenarios, their survival might be threatened, right? And if you are not well, obviously you can't go to work, so you will have to take more breaks, and then industries will suffer because of labor shortage. And then again, like we already discussed, if then the move is towards mechanization, then how the society and economy will cope and support the people who are displaced is another big challenge, right? Now we have discussed how these two sectors are going to be impacted, right? We have seen that both the sectors are facing a big threat, right? Now let us see what is being done to address these things. So first, so we'll look at a few missions basically. So and these are all part of the National Action Plan on Climate Change. So first one is the National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. So this one was launched in 2010 as a part of the National Action Plan for Climate Change. Focus areas for this National Mission for Sustainable Habitat are to support the development of sustainable habitat standards. So what are standards? Basically things like building codes, how you construct your buildings, what kind of materials can be used, how much ventilation is needed, how much heating, how much cooling you need. So detailed building codes have been developed, and we'll see one instance later in the video as well. So basically to promote the creation or construction of more sustainable buildings, right, that have a lower impact on the global warming, so they are more environment friendly, and they can also on the flip side withstand the attack of weather elements better compared to the buildings that are being constructed so far, right? So that is the first focus area. Then it is also working on developing plans for each city that are aligned with the changing reality and include climate change related adaptation and mitigation concern. For example, some time back Mumbai had published its climate action plan, right? So they project in what way the climate for the city is going to change, and then keeping that in mind, how the city's development should be planned, what kind of infrastructure should we create, what kind of adaptation and mitigation policies we should create. For example, in Mumbai, if the sea level is expected to rise, intensity of rains are going to increase, then we need to create more efficient infrastructure to basically withdraw the water from the city, because then again, Mumbai being a coastal city, if sea level rises, most of the water from wastewater goes into the sea right now. So how are you going to continue evacuating that water into the sea? How you're going to need to modify the infrastructure? Maybe you need to create sea walls and all to make sure that the coastal areas are not flooded and all, right? So those kind of things, what kind of housing you will build, how you will support the communities that are living on the coast and will be impacted by the change in sea level and all that, right? So cities are working on development plans that are going to be aligned with the changing reality because of climate change, right? Then mobility plans, right? Because again, transport is a major source of emission, and in economies you need to move people. So we are not seeing now seeing a lot of Indian cities are moving towards more climate friendly modes of transport. More and more cities are constructing metro trains, electric vehicles are being promoted, more transport corporations are buying electric buses, and also that you continue moving people, but you reduce the impact that activity has on overall climate by like reducing the share of vehicles running on fossil fuels, right? So energy efficient, cost effective, and long term transportation, right? Long term because in the long, if you don't plan, then it is going to worsen the situation. So over a long term, if you can plan, move to more sustainable modes of transport, and it's energy efficient, right? Battery operated vehicles generally require less energy than fossil fuel operated vehicles, and cost effective with advances in technology, right? And then capacity building, so that you have the manpower required to understand the issues and then implement the policies that are being created. So an example of a standard for sustainable buildings is the Energy Conservation Building Code. This was developed by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in 2007 and updated recently in 2017. Right? And it imposes minimum energy efficiency requirements for the design and construction of commercial buildings. So it applies only to commercial buildings, but similar standards are being developed for residential buildings as well, right? And this one applies to buildings having a large requirement of energy. So basically detailed specifications as to what ventilation is required, what material is to be used in windows, how much energy efficiency is required, how it is to be measured, all in a detailed building code has been published, and anybody developing, constructing buildings with specified loads has to follow these standards, right? So what the BEE has done, it has divided the country into 5 climatic zones, and for each climatic zones, different compliance levels have been defined in terms of how energy efficient the building has to be, right? So these are the 5 climatic zones. So this is the basically hot and dry zone, the large orange one, this one, this zone, and here this is the warm and humid zone. The other yellow part is called the composite zone. Then there are small pockets which are called temperate zones, and then very few here, and then in the northeast some pockets. These are called the cold zones. So for each different kind of zones, different levels of building standards have been defined that have to be followed by developers of commercial buildings, right? And by this standard, the aim is to reduce the energy use in new buildings by around 50% from current levels, right? So this is one example. The National Green Hydrogen Mission. So what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is basically a fuel, right? Hydrogen can be burnt to produce energy. And on burning hydrogen, what happens is you get water. So it doesn't produce any um, what do you call emissions. So it's like considered the holy grail in terms of a fuel. So far we have not been able to harness hydrogen because hydrogen doesn't exist in free state in the atmosphere, right? So from to extract hydrogen, first we have to break the water molecule, right? So H2O is the water molecule. So we have to break the water molecule and extract hydrogen and then burn the hydrogen to produce the water molecule again. Right. So far what happens is hydrogen, when it is produced, it requires a lot of energy. Now, if you are using energy from traditional sources, right, from let's say coal-fired plant, then you are basically not friendly to the environment, right? You need a lot of non-renewable source energy to create hydrogen, which you will burn. But ultimately, in the end analysis, you will not really be creating any sort of green energy. So green hydrogen basically is the hydrogen where this splitting of the water molecule takes place using energy that is produced through renewable sources, right? So that is a technology right now in a very nascent stage, and the purpose of this National Green Hydrogen Mission is to support the development of technology, make it cost effective, and over time ensure that India emerges as a global hub for green hydrogen, right? So this green hydrogen mission right now, almost 20,000 crore rupees government has committed, and the focus is that we will create demand for use of hydrogen as a fuel. We will create capacity for production of hydrogen or green hydrogen, and then utilization of green hydrogen. So the idea is in various high energy industries, such as, for example, let's say iron and steel industry, which requires a lot of energy, aluminum industry, which requires a lot of energy. And if you are able to reduce a part of their, even a part of their reliance and transfer their use of conventional energy to, let's say, more reliance on green hydrogen, you will see huge impact on their emissions, right? So basically then these industries become more environment friendly, and then, like I said, we also produce enough green hydrogen eventually over a long time that we are able to export energy. Now that is a very important concern from the economy part, because right now we are a net importer of energy, right? Net importer of energy. We import almost 85% of our fossil fuel requirements, right? So crude petroleum, crude oil, almost 85% of crude oil is imported, right? So that is a big drag on our economy, right? A large chunk of our foreign exchange goes to buying the crude petroleum, which is then refined in Indian refineries to create petrol, diesel, gas, and all that other products, right? So if we are able to change our reliance from crude oil to something like green hydrogen, which then we export also to the rest of the world. So not only we make this deficit go away, we start earning foreign exchange. And more importantly, we also become energy efficient and our growth then becomes climate friendly, right? If we are able to actually utilize this fuel. So that's why I said that it is a very important project or mission that the country has embarked upon, right? So the idea is that through this mission, we will encourage others to invest around 8 lakh crore in the green hydrogen sector by 2030. Now, the likely outcomes what we are looking to achieve by 2030 is that we are able to produce at least 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen every year, right? And we reduce our fossil fuel imports by over 1 lakh crore rupees and also create 6 lakh jobs, because this create manufacturing of green hydrogen, all the process will require specific machines, specific skills, new plants will have to set up, so that will create job, right? And then overall renewable energy capacity addition of 125 gigawatts of renewable energy new can be created in India if we are able to achieve the objectives of this mission, right? And we will be able to abate, meaning we will be able to reduce almost 50 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, right? And how we are going to do it? Through these interventions. So we will offer financial incentives to encourage the manufacturing of electrolyzers. Now, what are electrolyzers? Basically, these are machines in which this water molecule is broken into hydrogen and oxygen, right? So, and then help in the production of green oxygen. And these obviously have to then run on renewable energy in order to classify the hydrogen that is produced as green hydrogen, right? And then what we'll do is we'll develop things called green hydrogen hubs. So specific areas focus on developing the entire ecosystem around the manufacture of green hydrogen. So capacity to manufacture electrolyzers and then basically synthesize the water molecule into green hydrogen, and then how to store, how to transport, all those in facilities in single hubs will be created, right? And what is the policy? So now basically the government is working on a broad policy to support the establishment of an overall ecosystem of green hydrogen. So all the different kinds of activities, skills, processes that you need for the manufacture of green hydrogen that encourage the creation of this ecosystem. Develop a set of standards and regulations so that the industry grows in a sustainable and structured manner. Then support public-private partnerships. So use both the capacity available within the government as well as in the private sector to promote research and development, right? Like I said in the beginning, that right now the production of green hydrogen is very expensive because the technology is at a nascent stage. So how we produce green hydrogen at a mass scale, ultimately to be able to use it in the kind of numbers that we are envisaging, we will need very low cost energy and we will need large supply of electrolyzers, right? So how we get there is something that research and development will help us, right? So for that, you use the existing capacity in various scientific establishments, academies, universities, institute of technology that have been set up in the public sector, and also within the private industry. Various companies are working on various sectors of energy. So use the skills available in both these sectors to basically increase the rate of progress, right? And finally, a skill development program, again for what kind of scientists you require, what kind of technicians you require. So create again in the infrastructure that will help you get those kind of skills in the people in the country, right? So this is the green hydrogen mission, very, very important, both from the exam perspective and overall for the perspective of the future of the country as well. The next one is the so we have basically, sorry, this one got yeah. So now basically what we have covered are the key missions that the government is launching domestically. Now India is also taking a big leadership role in helping the world drive towards a more sustainable future, right? So a number of initiatives have been launched by our country in partnership with important agencies or governments in other countries, right? So we will review some of the more important ones here. So first one is a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Now we have already discussed that with increasing climate change, existing construction will come under increasing threat. We have also discussed that the construction sector is a big source of emissions, which eventually leads to climate change. So what we want to do is make infrastructure or have construction that is resilient to more extreme events, right? So it can withstand such events in a much better way. And the second is that we want to construct in a way that reduces the carbon footprint or emissions from the construction process itself, right? So these two initiatives or these two objectives are sought to be met through this coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. The Indian Prime Minister had launched this in September 29 at the UN Climate Action Summit, right? So what is it? It is basically a partnership of all stakeholders who are interested in promoting disaster resilient infrastructure. So entities such as various national governments, various agencies of the United Nations, right, and various programs of the United Nations, various development banks like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and so on, right, and financing mechanisms, basically from where you get finance, right, how you mobilize finance and then invest it in specific objectives, entities from the private sector, entities from the academia, and various kinds of research institutions or knowledge institutions, think tanks, etc. So all stakeholders who are interested in promoting a better future, right, and ensuring that infrastructure can have a lower footprint on global emissions, and be more resilient or strong in resisting the impact, are basically invited to partner in this coalition, right? So the idea is ki you work together, you learn from each other, and then you basically take these best practices and go and implement them on the ground, right? So promote the resilience of infrastructure systems to climate and disaster risks, and ensure that our economy develops in a sustainable manner. Right. So far, 31 countries, 6 international organizations, and 2 private sector organizations have joined this coalition, and more will continue joining. So this is the first international initiative that India has led. The second example of India's leadership in driving the world towards a more climate-friendly development paradigm is the Leadership Group for Industry Transition, right? So this was launched by Sweden and India jointly, again at the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. And the aim of this leadership group is to enable energy intensive industry to transition to low carbon pathways, meaning to shift to manufacturing processes where they emit less carbon, right? So we saw in our discussion on construction how energy intensive industries like steel, cement, etc. are also huge emitters of carbon dioxide, right? So if we are able to help these industries move to low carbon pathways, will significantly bring down the amount of carbon dioxide being emitted in the atmosphere and be able to control the extent of climate change, right? Eventually, the plan is to help these, or eventually the world basically wants to move to a net zero situation, right, where we are not emitting any additional carbon dioxide. So all this is part of that larger goal, right? So if you help these large industries move to a less climate unfriendly situation, then eventually overall you help the world, right? And there are 3 main focus areas, again, to promote partnership so that you work together, you learn from each other, right? Facilitate funding and investment in climate friendly infrastructure and energy generation sources, and then help the industries transition to low carbon pathways, right? Again, their emission reduces. So things like green hydrogen, which we discussed, and other sources of renewable energy, and also modifications to the manufacturing process, for example. So through various R&D and various adoption of innovative practices, how you help these industries become more climate friendly. And always there is an element of capacity development required, right? You need the people involved to have the skills, and also regulations need to evolve with time. Regulators need to have those skills to understand the issues involved and develop appropriate regulations. So these are the areas that this leadership group focuses on. So now we have seen why construction and manufacturing are important. We have seen how they are in many ways creating climate change or causing climate change. We have also now reviewed a few initiatives aimed at helping these industries adapt to and mitigate the impact of climate change. At a philosophical or strategy level, globally, there is growing recognition for the need to move to a practice of circular economy from the current practice of what is called the linear economy. So let us understand this in a little bit of detail. And that is the last part of our discussion for this video. Linear economy is basically based on a model of take, make, and waste. What does that mean? That you take a resource from the environment or the earth, you make something useful out of it, you use it, and then it is waste product, you discard it. So that is the linear economy model. The circular economy model is basically more environment friendly. It is more sustainable, where the aim is to reduce the waste and reuse anything as much as possible. And when it is not possible to reuse it, maybe recycle it and repurpose it to different forms, right? In which again you use it. So this uh, basically the linear progression from raw material to an incinerator or landfill is basically then transformed here, right? After it is used in the original form, you service it, so you reuse it, you recycle it, or you repurpose it, right? So the focus of the circular model is to reduce the waste of energy and material through the value chain. What is a value chain? Basically the steps through which we add value to anything. For example, cotton is grown in the field, then thread is made out of it, then fabric is made out of the thread, and that fabric is then converted into apparel, right? So in the linear process, once the apparel has, let's say, lost its appeal to the customer, they will just throw it away. So are there ways in which you can then reduce the waste, right? It is not thrown as garbage, but are there ways in which you reuse, reduce, or recycle this apparel, right? So that overall through the system, you reduce the waste of material as well as energy, right? And therefore move the whole economy to a more sustainable paradigm, right? So we will see an example for the manufacturing sector also, or the construction, and that is why this discussion I thought is useful to have here, right? So in the through the adoption of circular economy, the entire manufacturing industry can be made more sustainable, right? So for example, take the example of a plastic bottle, right? Plastic bottle is manufactured out of various chemicals. It is used for storage, and then it is thrown away. Let's say a can of carbonated drink, right? Now, once it is thrown away, it is burnt or it just chokes the drains and water bodies and all that. All those environmental problems are created. What is the alternate approach or circular economic approach? That basically that plastic bottle can be repurposed or recycled into what is called fiber, and then fabric can be woven out of it. Recently, even the Prime Minister had worn a jacket made of recycled material, right? So there are many ways in which uh, the waste of one cycle of use can be repurposed or recycled into other purposes, right? Similarly, there are initiatives to recycle batteries, right? There are initiatives to recycle the vehicles. So in many ways, there are already approaches that can be used to reduce the waste in the manufacturing process. So concrete, which is a uh, very important component of the entire construction process, is a highly polluting product, and the major part of pollution comes from the manufacture of cement. Right now, there are technologies being developed where a part of this cement can actually be replaced by glass. Right. So waste glass which is discarded is basically recycled into powder through specific techniques. Not just you just don't powder it, but recycled into powder through specific techniques, and then that glass is used to partially replace cement in the process of manufacturing concrete. Other components of concrete are sand, gravel, etc. Right, but cement is the highest polluting component of concrete. Right, so what happens is cement is generally 15% of concrete, but 96% of emissions from concrete are because of cement. So now if a part of cement in this concrete is replaced by this recycled glass, right, this is estimated to reduce the emissions arising out of concrete by anywhere between 20 to 40%. So you are achieving huge savings, and then you are also reducing waste in the environment, right? The glass otherwise would have landed in some landfill and it would have just sat there on its own. It would not have degraded, right? So now this glass is reclaimed, this so-called waste glass, and then used to make concrete, which is then used in construction sector. So you reduce the climatic or the carbon footprint of the construction sector. And similarly, there are many ways in which different manufacturing industries also can reduce their carbon footprint through adoption circular economy principles. In our country also, the government has implemented a number of steps to promote adoption of circular economy. For example, there is something called guidelines on extended producer responsibility when handling plastic waste. So what are the responsibilities of companies that are manufacturing plastic or that they are using for packaging, etc. Their liabilities and their responsibilities are defined in these guidelines. Similarly, government has come out with a policy on how steel scrap, right, waste steel can be recycled, so that again waste is used for creation of new steel, and then in the economy we basically from this usage stage we again recycle it, create new part, and reduce the overall waste of energy and material throughout the process of value addition, right? And then there are construction and demolition waste management rules also that lay out how the economic or environmental impact from this waste can be reduced through adoption of circular economy principles, right? So this brief discussion, I hope, help you get an overview or idea of the way circular economy can help us move to a less wasteful future, right? Less wasteful paradigm of development by adopting this principle of reuse, reduce, and recycle. Right. So that concludes our discussion on how construction and manufacturing will be impacted by climate change and what we are doing to address this impact. Before I let you go, I'll quickly recap so that everything that we discussed is fresh, right, in your memory. So these two sectors are significant sources of greenhouse gas emissions themselves, and they will face multiple types of risk from climate change. And then majorly what will happen is that their costs will increase, worker productivity will decrease, and operations are likely to face more disruptions because of higher frequency of intense climate event, right? And then finally we saw what are the some major initiatives at the national and global level that the government is undertaking or is planning to undertake. And then finally we discussed how moving to a paradigm of circular economy can help us move to a better future, right? So that was our discussion. Again, like our focus has been on making these videos useful to you in terms of their exam worthiness and compiling all the information that in one place otherwise you would not have got. So I hope that you are finding these videos educational and informative, and I'll see you again soon with the next video in this series. Till then, take care and bye.